What is up, gang? Thought of the day number 35. How to avoid bad data interpretation when you go and do some testing in a lab. I had the case a couple weeks ago. CrossFit athlete, actually, female CrossFit athlete, sent me her test results from a lab, and unfortunately, so first of all, before I go into the unfortunately, I want to say that I think CrossFit athletes and any athlete taking time, spending money, going and doing testing, assessing their current fitness status, measuring their physiology, and trying to optimize and improve their training, I think it's fantastic. So I would highly recommend for any athlete that deems himself or herself serious, who dedicates hours and hours of training every single week. If you're just shooting in the dark and hoping for the best, I think you're missing out on some potential improvements that are within your reach. And I think you should invest a little bit in yourself and go get tested, whether it's in a lab near you, whether it's with me, whether it's with someone else. Lots of people provide those kind of services. Get a test done, get those thresholds assessed, individualize your training intensities, and hopefully if the person is able to give you some useful information via your testing results, orient your training based on what you need. And usually, speaking from experience here, usually the test data is only just going to reinforce what you already know, which is that in general, you're training too hard when you think you're training easy. That's point number one that comes out 95% of the time or more. Number two is that you need to do more of the things that you're bad at or that you don't usually do. That's usually how it goes. It's that simple. So could you skip the testing, slow down your easy training, and then do a bit more of the type of training that you never do because you don't like it and you're not good at it? For example, you're a very powerful athlete, a lot of muscle, so you like the short and intense stuff, so you never really do any tempo type sessions. 3x20 is a completely foreign concept to you. 6 out of 10 intensity on a long hour session is completely foreign to you. Well, guess what? You need it. You need to do it. And vice versa. If you're more of the endurance type, so you like the long stuff, you could go forever, you like a diesel engine, but as soon as it gets short and intense, you fall apart. Well, guess what? You probably need to do some of that just to round out your fitness. So could you skip the testing and just go and do those two things? Absolutely. However, if you decide to get some precise measurements, which is interesting and valuable to track your progress over time, because you're going to track your 1 rep max. If you're a CrossFitter, you're going to track your 1 rep max in weightlifting lifts. You're going to track your 1 rep maxes in strength lifts. Maybe you're going to get a 5 RM or a 10 RM on certain movements. You're going to get, how many kipping pull-ups can you do in 3 minutes? If we talk about the gymnastic part of things and more of the endurance side. The thing is with conditioning is that the markers that are the most relevant and interesting to track are sub-maximal, meaning that you can't just get them with a maximal effort test. Can you get an FTP with a 20-minute test or a 60-minute test? Yes, but you won't be able to get your first threshold, and that is usually the most important element in order to better distribute your training volume and track progress on that fitness parameter and that work capacity parameter. And for a lot of athletes, this is something that requires work. It's an area of potential improvement because it's rarely been worked on and it hasn't been developed to its fullest potential. And it is a quality that you should be able to improve year upon year if you're serious about your athletic development and about being a competitor in whatever sport you may be. So absolutely, go get tested, get some data on yourself. Now, a couple things to get the most out of those tests when you go and do a retest, because there's no point in doing one test once and then never testing again, go once a year, let's say, as a minimum, just so you can see year to year, am I actually improving? Am I moving in the right direction? Have I trained for a full year and I didn't even, improve my conditioning? Well, that's a problem. So you need to retest, which is going to keep you honest with the work that you're doing, and is it actually paying off the way it should? Those are important questions to ask. And so go get tested, and when you go get a retest, that is when you go to the same lab, the same person, the same testing protocol, using the same measurement tools. That is very important, because you cannot compare results that come from different protocols and or different measurement tools. So whomever you pick to work with in that regard, just stick with them. Put a reminder in your calendar 1 year from the test. Go back and do a retest. Again, most people won't do it because they don't want to see that they've been training in the void and actually not improving for a whole year. And it's sad, it's unfortunate, spending all that time training and not improving. So go and do the measurements, go and get the data, and keep yourself honest with your training. Now, back to the case that I was citing at the beginning of this video. I saw the testing data from a CrossFit athlete, a female CrossFit athlete, and off the bat, on the first page of the report, I see that something's off, because her zone 4 is humongous and her zone 5, going into the red zone, the high intensity stuff, is literally barely visible on the graph. Why is that? Because apparently the person that was conducting the testing and doing the interpretation didn't know what they were doing. And I'm not trying to be mean or point fingers, and I don't even know who it was or where it was. All I can tell you is that it was a lab, it was a doctor, and it's not the first time that I hear stories like that or see data like this one. And it's very, very unfortunate that clinics or hospitals or universities conduct physiological testing with athletes, but have no context as to how to interpret that data, and can't even see the mistakes in their own interpretations. Not because the graphs are hard to read and all that stuff, but because you set the second threshold of a female CrossFit athlete, and these people are fit as fuck, just so we're clear on this, but don't go and put a first threshold at 140 watts on the bike and a second threshold at 320 watts. That just doesn't happen, A handful of the male competitors that I've worked with have a second threshold above 300 watts. A handful. And even some of the games level athletes that I've tested do not have a second threshold higher than 250 watts for male athletes. And in general, male results are going to be higher, and the muscle mass on the man makes it so that we're going to usually see some higher results compared to female. So the typical female athlete, if she's got a well-developed engine for a CrossFitter, she's going to maybe be around 200. That's already a good second threshold. 200, 230 maybe. That's a really good second threshold for a female competitor. But 320 is just completely, it's not unattainable, don't get me wrong. And this is not supposed to, bash anybody or whatever. I'm just saying that the interpretation was completely off, and visibly so. And it's really unfortunate, because when you go test, you want a coherent interpretation of your data so that you can train in an intelligent way and distribute your intensity intelligently throughout your training week and the coming months of training. And it's a huge problem if you go and get tested and then the person is not even capable of realizing that they made a huge mistake in interpreting your data, and they give you a second threshold at over 300 watts when it should just be above 200 watts. So essentially the interpretation was 100 watts higher than it should have been. It was a 320, it should have been a 220, which again is a very good result, okay, for a female competitor. But if she had gone and done her threshold work at 300 watts instead of 200 watts, well, you can imagine what would have happened. She would have never been able to hold her sessions. She would have never been able to see the progress that she was hoping to see, because she thought she was training in, zone 3-4. She was actually far into zone 5. So how can you do to get around those issues, or to avoid those problems of interpretation? Well, you got to know how to interpret data. And there's a really great paper that I'll cite in the description. It's one from Nick Jamnik, and he goes over a review of how to interpret physiological data and find those submaximal anchors, as he calls them. So whether you're measuring lactate thresholds, whether you're measuring ventilatory thresholds, the gas exchange threshold, the respiratory compensation point, all those things. I got a little friend here. He's not mine, but he's my friend today. Whichever metric you're going to be interpreting, you need to understand what is the standard, approved, validated way of interpreting those data. And when it comes to the ventilatory thresholds, he talks about it in detail. There's graphs there, and I don't measure CO2 in my testing just because I don't have the tools yet. But all I did is I went to the paper, I read the section on ventilatory thresholds, and I looked at the graphs, and then I looked at the graphs on this competitor's report, and then I just reinterpreted the data based on what the paper said and what Nick and colleagues outlined in the paper. So it's that simple. But you have to check that the person did it properly, or at least ask them, how do you interpret threshold 1? How do you interpret threshold 2? And if they can't give you a coherent answer, that's a problem. So make sure the person that you're working with is competent, and make sure that they know what they're doing before you go test with them. So ask them a few questions beforehand. If they're going to ask them how far they'll let you go into the test. If they're going to say that they'll stop you at 7 out of 10, don't go and work with them, because they're obviously not accustomed to working with athletes that know how to push themselves. And you should be going to a max if that's the intention on the test, of course. And you should have a coherent interpretation of your testing data by the person in question. So here we go. I'm going to put all this in the description for you, so you can go and read the paper, so you can go and get informed on how we interpret data. And if you go and get tested, when you go and get tested, because I hope you do, I hope you run into someone who knows what they're doing. It can help you distribute your intensity better and establish some training priorities based on your profile, your sport, and your needs. So here you go. It had been a while since the last video in English. I want to do more. Right now I can't, but I will as time goes on, and I have a bit more time on my schedule. In the meantime, leave me your questions in the comments for future videos. I look forward to answering them. It'll be bit by bit for now, but I'll do my best. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.